Hello YouTube. Today we're going to talk about the Teth's internal elevation system. The system that I developed over a course of the last 25 years or so, and is basically a system that is comprised of many different aspects of different religions such as Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, yoga. A lot of different systems went into creating this. And it's basically a spiritual system, but anybody can use it. Atheist, Muslim, Christian, whatever you are, you could definitely use this system to elevate the ego. And that's basically what it is. It is about elevating the ego and the true self up to an equal point where the two meet, and you will have a lot more control in your life. Now, what I mean by the true self, I'm basically talking about your soul. Um, Different words like soul and God have been used so much, and then to me, like, they make it hard for me to use these words, but these are words everybody's familiar with, so we're going to continue to use God and the soul. Now, first, I guess let's talk about God and exactly my views on God and what I think it is. And you notice I said it and not he, because I believe that human beings have a tendency of giving God human attributes, love, jealousy, all these things. We associate him with us. Although he is in us, quote unquote, he is not human. It is not human. It is not even a person, place, or thing. It is just a force, so to say. A force that is made up of that energy that I talked about in the last video. Energy is God, basically, and we are all a part of that. And this energy can manifest itself into matter, which is us, humans, or animals, or bricks, or cell phones, or whatever physical thing you see. Started as a thought, a vibration, then was that vibration gained a lot of speed and turned into energy, and that energy gained a lot of speed and turned itself into matter. But we'll get into that when we talk about the elements. But back onto God and the soul. The soul is basically your energy source, your battery pack for your body. And your brain is basically the ego. Now, the ego uses the brain to control the body. The soul basically is the seat of your love and all of your emotions. Now, what makes emotions a very touchy subject is when you compare us to the animal kingdom, you will notice that mammals, especially, have a lot of the same emotions that human beings do: fear, love, etc., etc. But the lower down you go, when you start getting into like the insect kingdom and things of this nature, you start to lose the emotion, and it's more on an instinct level, which is basically your soul's level, instinct. Not to compare it to a bug, I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible to make my point. So, when the brain was created, it was empty. And the soul was the driving force. Remember back when you were a child, how great imagination was, how great life was. There was no real worry, there was no real consequences to anything, because you were basically living off of instinct and joy. Once you hit puberty, That is, in my opinion, when the ego is created. Because once you hit puberty, you become aware of a lot of things about yourself. You become more self-conscious about your looks, the way you're accepted in society, a lot of these things. So the ego is created to protect the true self, the soul. A lot of theories you may hear that the ego is a bad thing. The ego is not bad. The ego is just different. It is a protection device. It is only here to protect the human body and protect itself. That's pretty much because it identifies itself with you. Like when you see your shadow, you can view that as your ego. It's shapeless, but it lives with you at all times. And it only takes a little bit of light to basically shine that ego out into the world. So that is basically what the tie system is that light that allows you to visibly view your ego. So the soul is then out of control once the ego is formed. The soul gets buried really deep. And the only time that it manifests itself is when that you are under extreme emotional distress, such as if your girlfriend or boyfriend leaves you, if someone dies, things like that are the only time when your soul is in complete control because you're having an instinctual reaction to a situation. These things are going to make you vulnerable, and the ego doesn't like that. So that's when the ego steps in. You dry your tears up, you puff your chest up, blah blah. Now the ego is important because the ego pretty much is in control of the brain. Because in yoga they say that the ego sits at the medulla oblongata, right here at the base of the brain. They say this is the first thing that is formed in the womb. They say this is where we all start. So with that being said, the ego is pretty much the brain. This is why we only use such a little portion of our brain, because the soul should power the brain. The ego is just basically kind of in the way at this point. It does have its use, when you're defending yourself, when you are taking or being assertive and things of this nature. So the ego does have its place. But for the most part, most people, their ego has been running their whole entire teenage to adult life, and they just didn't realize it because the ego has a good way of hiding itself and pretending that it is the soul or the true self. So a lot of times when you begin to awaken the true self, the ego will pretend that it is the true self, and it'll confuse you. And this confusion could draw you into giving up. And it cause you to say, this is bullshit. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just going crazy. You basically are inducing a level of psychosis in a sense, because you're identifying parts of yourself that were latent or hidden for a long time. Things in yourself that you really didn't know existed. You have more control of yourself than you really believe you do. And this is what the Teth internal elevation system is going to do. It is going to help elevate you to a point where you are in control of your own life. Now, by being in control of your own life, we kind of going to have to take God out of the picture. Now, before I lose a lot of people, just listen to what I mean by this. God is not a parent. God is not your friend. He doesn't really care either way if you live or die, because life or death is just a part of the process. So it is not a thing where you should be afraid to die, because death is just a natural part of life. So, and this is very evident, like I say, in the animal kingdom. You can just watch a lion tear through an antelope and you will understand what I mean. That life is not fair. There is no fairness to life. So, basically, let's look at it as God gave you all that you needed in your soul, because of course you come from the same source, so you have all the information that God has. But you are not God. You're just a byproduct, so to say, of God. Um, so once you were created and you started growing up and all these things started to happen and your soul took over, your ego took over, you're living by the ego. Now we identify the true self. And how do we identify the true self? Well, we're going to do this with a lot of meditation or prayer, depending on where you're coming from. Because meditation and prayer, believe it or not, are the exact same thing. Because all it is really is concentration on one particular thing, and that one particular thing is going to be God. And not as far as you're praying to God, but you're trying to make your soul as simple as possible. When you bring it back to the simplistic state, then you'll live more by your instincts and not by your brain. Therefore, the true self will start to be in control, and it'll start to develop the brain in a way where it will start to get everything that it wants. Anything that you kind of imagine will come true. I mean, just think about when you were a kid, when you thought about or imagined something for a really long time, normally you would get it. Or you probably notice in your death, like if you really think back, think about something that you really concentrate on really, really hard and you got it. Well, that's basically what we're going to do when we awaken the true self by developing our will. And we're getting short on time, so I'm going to continue this in another video. So it's going to take a while. So the will is basically the driving force behind energy. That is what God was before he created the universe. He was just pure will or thought, or the vibration of thought. Once this starts to get manifested, it moves in such a way where it grabs on the atoms, and these atoms start to form. It's just the way the universe was created. It's the same way the human beings were created. Everything was pushed out, and as they were pushed out, it gathered and gained. And that's basically what we're doing here. We're gathering information, gaining strength, moving upwards. We always want to move our energy in an upward fashion towards God. Now, when developing your true self, you will notice that a lot of self-doubt and a lot of self-hate will arise, because the ego is going to do whatever it needs to do to keep control, because just like anything with power, it wants to stay in power. It thinks that it can do the job better than you can, and it really can't, because all it does is want to make things easy, and life unfortunately is not easy. It is hard. It takes a lot of work to do this, what we're doing.